TFM.
Welcome, Boomers, to another episode of Warp 5, our dedicated Star Trek Enterprise podcast. I'm Christopher Jones, and with me, as he always is my esteemed co-host, Matthew Rushing. And Matthew, you've really been up in your wardrobe game lately, but I have to say that Hawaiian shirt you're wearing today, if you're wearing that to impress the women on Risa, you may as well just stay here and record this podcast.
I mean, Chris, got to stand out to get noticed, and I aim to stand out. I'm going to order me some pan-fried catfish, and hopefully they have that there, whatever the equivalent is. And I aim to get noticed.
You're going to eat that by the pool and just wait for that stress relief that T'Pol has promised you, right?
100%. I'm super excited, and I am ready to be relieved.
I'm just picturing a captain on the bridge like, sir, you're relieved. You're relieved of duty. Please return to your quarters. Oh, man. All right.
Man.
Yeah, today we're going to be talking about an episode involving Risa, although they're not there yet. This is Fallen Hero. Here's a quick recap. T'Pol's plans to help her human crewmates relieve stress are interrupted when the Enterprise is ordered to pick up Vulcan Ambassador V'Lar from the planet Mazar, which is a convenient rhyme, after she is accused of criminal misconduct. Once aboard the NX-01, V'Lar surprises everyone, particularly T'Pol, with her friendly behavior and finds an unexpected ally in Captain Archer. So, Matthew, this is, I think, quite an interesting episode. Why don't we just start, because we already teased it at the beginning, start with a little salt and pepper here at the beginning. Well, let's talk about sex. The episode opens with what today seems pretty normal, I think, but on television in 2002, this was a rather surprising opening for a Star Trek episode.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that this was one of those places. This is the first season, and we are definitely trying to kind of, open things up when it comes to Star Trek. In this show, specifically, obviously make things just a little bit sexier. And, I think what this really does, though, is that it kind of breaks the ice in a really funny way. And it's a conversation which is an interesting one for them to be having in the first place. Like, I love that T'Pol brings this up. I love that this is, for Archer and Trip, is kind of an embarrassing thing to have somebody bring up. But at the same time, I think this makes sense for this show to be tackling because we are at a different place in Star Trek history. We are at a place where this is the first time that crews are out there, that they are on the final frontier. And this would absolutely be something to which you would have to try and figure out, right? Like, if you are a captain and you are out in space for so many years, possibly, what are you going to do? Are you just going to be, someone who abstains, which, can happen? But I think that this is a really interesting conversation for them to have because, again, you're on a mixed crew ship. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, T'Pol does bring up a great point. They're officers, right? And unless you're going to be dating in the officer pool, which is really small on Enterprise, really and you're small. Of the same rank, then it's inappropriate for you to. So I think all of that is just really, really interesting for the episode. And yes, it is a very funny way to open the episode, but I do think it is also a fantastic way to open the episode and kind of allow the characters. And, the other thing I think it does is it just allows the characters to have a little bit more fun.
Mm-hmm. Well, it serves a couple of purposes. One is what you're describing. And the other tying into the story of the episode is it sets up right from the beginning T'Pol's observation of humans, which is important for how she interacts with V'Lar where humans are concerned, how she prepares the humans for V'Lar coming on the ship, and then the whole resolution of the story where Archer and V'Lar kind of bring that human Vulcan understanding a little bit closer together in some ways, not entirely. It's a great contrast with T'Pol's views. And I also feel like T'Pol's behavior in this episode regarding humans is colored by V'Lar being a Vulcan ambassador coming aboard, her wanting to present like a purely Vulcan environment for her. Contrast that with what we've seen of T'Pol in episodes before this, where she is becoming more comfortable with her human crewmates. And I think her real view isn't as stuffy as it's presented to V'Lar.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, when it comes to that, I think T'Pol is expecting in many ways that V'Lar is much more in line with what we would know of classic Vulcans. And what we see is that, her experiences, just like T'Pol's, have led her to be able to be more adaptable to the situations. And what's really interesting here is that obviously, V'Lar is the first ambassador. Really, we know Saval, right? But she's the first ambassador that we feel like really actually spend a lot of time with in the whole episode here. And she has, I think, a more interesting way of dealing with humans than, say, even somebody like Spock's dad does. Because she somewhat mimics their behavior. She makes them feel comfortable by using a lot of their type of language. She, greets them with a handshake. So she's really somebody who, to quote the Apostle Paul, she's all things to all people, right? And I think there's something really interesting. And of course, that's what makes her so successful as an ambassador in the first place.
Right. She does exactly what a good ambassador should do, which is to be interested in the culture where they're representing their government, get to know the people, take part in the culture and the customs, and be adaptable. And not all ambassadors are that way, but I think the best ones are. And I think that just watching her and seeing how she's obviously curious about other cultures and willing to not sacrifice or betray her own views or beliefs, but to be adaptable to others and to consider those. And we don't see that with a lot of Vulcans, and we certainly don't see that with Vulcans in the first season of Enterprise. And it makes me wonder about Vulcans as explorers of space. Like if you're not, if you have this idea that your culture is superior and you kind of look down on most people you meet, why would you be that interested in exploring space in the first place? And so then it makes me think, is V'Lar more representative of average Vulcans of this time period, and the ones that we've seen so far are these stuffy military and government figures? Or is she the outlier? It makes you think.
I think that is a really good question. What I really enjoy about her character, and I think one of the things that's really interesting is that, with the way Vulcans kind of are quote-unquote changed here for Enterprise, I think she's our first real inclination that Vulcans are very different than we thought. Because of her capacity to withhold the truth, to possibly lie, to be a spy, basically. There's a lot going on here when you dig into this episode that's very different from the Vulcans that we're comfortable with from the original series. And so I think she is really the biggest indication so far that something is very different
Mm-hmm. Although we have seen with Shadows of Pajim and the Andorian incident
You're right.
That there are Vulcans who are willing to do that. But
that's a good point.
But those are a bit different. It's different and it's not different. What we saw in the Andorian incident with the huge underground facility, those are people that are obviously stationed there. They're probably military personnel. The monks themselves are part of it because they're aware that it's there. But this is a case where you have someone who's an actual ambassador being sent to represent the government one-on-one, who is doing something that we would not expect from Vulcans. Maybe we would expect more from Romulans when we're thinking about Star Trek that we've known in the past.
Right. Well, and I think what you're saying, I would rephrase then, this is just more confirmation.
Mm-hmm.
Like this is further confirmation to build, like this is a great building piece to add to that wall of like, wow, Vulcans, that there's something that is very different about them that we have not seen or really experienced before that is truly unique.
Well, I love, you mentioned the handshake earlier, and I love that T'Pol told them, do not try to shake hands. And then as soon as V'Lar gets there, she reaches out her hand to shake. It's like right off the bat, things are different than T'Pol expected. And the time she spends with Hoshi is great. And she wants to speak English, practice her English. It's just so much unexpected behavior from her. And I mean, that leads to another topic here that we can delve into while we're talking about the Vulcans. In reading some of the background of people who have worked on this episode, Chris Black is one of the writers, and he had said once in Star Trek Magazine, I believe it was, that one of the things that he liked about the story is that it answered the critics who had been disappointed with the way the Vulcans had been shown in Enterprise and helped restore balance to the series' portrayals of the species. So I'm curious what you think about that, because my first reaction to that is, really, was there a need to restore balance? Because we've often talked about how the portrayal is designed to set up an evolution of the Vulcans. And so I think it's an important part of the Enterprise story. And sometimes I take this view as being like, oh, we kind of messed up in our portrayal of them and we have to correct that. And then in this story, we've done that. Although I would still ask, in what ways did they do that? What do you think about that?
Yeah, that's, I don't really see this as being them fixing anything. I feel like this just seems to be continuing to add nuance to what they've already been doing. Because I think to Paul's thought about who V'Lar is going to be is maybe what we kind of think of as much more classic Vulcan. And then what we get is a reinforcement of the fact that Vulcans in this time period are much different than we have experienced. And so I think, to me, they do just a great job of continuing to add to what they've been doing, and I think do it in a really interesting way that allows us to explore then more of T'Pol and even her comfort level, that I think her discomfort level in some ways of maybe being confronted with how much she's changed.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And that maybe being why she is so uncomfortable with the fact that V'Lar seems so comfortable with making others around her more comfortable by allowing them and giving validity to the way they speak or the customs that they have.
That's a lot of comfortables there. Everybody's comfortable.
Yeah.
You're comfortable, and you're comfortable.
Except for T'Pol. Yeah.
Except for T'Pol. That's right. Yeah, I guess another way I could read the comment here about some sort of course correction is maybe there's this idea that the Vulcans had been portrayed as being too stern, too dismissive, too angry in the first season up to this point. And here they're at least bringing some jovial nature back, some of that, I don't know, I said curiosity earlier is what she has. And I think I always felt that Spock had a curiosity. So it's interesting that Vulcans are often portrayed as being so dry and maybe too scientific. Scientists are curious. I mean, that I think to be a good scientist, you have to be curious. But I think often they can come across as being too dry and analytical, which is what we get in the Vulcans here. And so maybe, and I always felt that curiosity in Spock, maybe more so or less so depending on where we are in the original series and the films, but I think it's there. So maybe a little bit of that character came back here with V'Lar that we hadn't seen up to this point. So maybe that's what Chris Black is saying,
right?
With that comment.
And I think all the Vulcans we meet here are helpful to the humans. You know, they're willing to be there. You know, they're willing to say thank you. They are in some ways, if you want to put, they're less angry and less standoffish.
Yeah. But
I think more than anything, what that helps see is that there's just nuance to the Vulcans. They're not a mono race at this point. There's a lot of different reactions to their interactions with humans and all of that kind of thing. So, I think that's good.
Yeah. And I use the word angry, I think, first here, and then you mentioned it again there. And I think it's not that we think Vulcans are angry. It's just that they come across as being kind of short and grumpy and grouchy and dismissive, more so than actual anger. But
yeah, absolutely.
And even here we see that V'Lar she's not eager to forget about humanity's past. You know, they have to really earn their place. And even Archer asks her, isn't a century of good behavior enough? And you do see that. Let's talk about T'Pol a little bit more, because I think this is also once again, a very good character building episode for T'Pol, and where she ends up at the end of the episode, in part because the title of the episode is Fallen Hero. And I think part of the problem here, of course, is that T'Pol knew who V'Lar was and kind of idolized her as an elder Vulcan and as an ambassador and her diplomatic accomplishments. And then when T'Pol found out she's quite different than she expected, and that she's done something that T'Pol would consider a black mark on her record, kind of really makes T'Pol rethink her own identity, I think, as a Vulcan and her own people.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting too is as you kind of get the story deconstructed about what's actually happening with V'Lar and everything, we find out that, she hasn't actually let T'Pol down. She has continued to uphold who T'Pol thought she was. And it really becomes a story then about trust. And it's interesting to think of the Vulcans as being characters who hold secrets and don't trust readily and more easily. And, so there's a lot of things happening in this episode. And I think T'Pol is very much a representation of how there's a lot of misconceptions happening. There's the misconception between T'Pol and V'Lar. There's the misconception from V'Lar to Archer and vice versa. And it's really all about communication opening up between those parties, to which really make things come together. And that all comes down to learning to trust, because at the end of the episode, we see that she says that T'Pol and Archer have created a bond, a trust, and a friendship that bodes well for humanity and Vulcans' relationships. And I think that's something that's actually pretty special. I think that's something that helps us see that, we are on the right track. And I think that's really cool, to be at that point where we're like, oh, this is a relationship that is going to be pivotal for the galaxy, really.
And you're referring to the relationship between humans and Vulcans in this case?
Yes, but specifically, the relationship between T'Pol and Archer is a relationship that is going to be pivotal to not only the galaxy at large, but to the relationship between Vulcans and humans, as well as to just Archer and T'Pol. So it's like working on all of these different levels, which I think is really interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can kind of see it as an echo of Kirk and Spock as well, of the captain and first officer, human and Vulcan, and that relationship being between the cultures being established even early on like this. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot here pulling humans and Vulcans together in a way that we have not seen up to this point, importantly influencing Archer, as you say, and T'Pol. And their coming together really helps advance the relationship between the two planets, which is pivotal to the future of at least the Alpha Quadrant and really the galaxy when you think about everything that we see later in Star Trek, because each culture on its own, I think, can achieve a certain level, but together, specifically Earth and Vulcan, are able to achieve a lot of great things for not only themselves, but for many worlds. But first they have to overcome this rift that's between them. And you still see it here. I mean, there's the conversation between T'Pol and V'Lar, where V'Lar says, obviously, Archer, and is not verbatim wording here, but says, obviously, Archer has something of his own to overcome where Vulcans are concerned. And T'Pol explains, well, he feels that we've held them back. There's also when the ship is in danger and Archer tells V'Lar, yeah, we're going to take you back unless you can tell me some good reason why we shouldn't, because my ship's going to get blown up, my crew's going to die. And that's where Archer still isn't to the point yet of making a major sacrifice for the Vulcans. Mm-hmm. But he starts to cross that bridge, I think, in this story because of his interaction with V'Lar.
Well, and I think, again, that comes down to the fact that she sees him as somebody that she can trust, and she breaks down her own stereotypes and prejudices really against humans, the same way Archer's been working to do as well. And it's when you both are able to do that together that you can start having actual productive conversations with one another. And I think that's what we get in the episode. And it does become another stepping stone in Archer winning the trust of the Vulcans to which he is coming in contact with. And the more time he's spending with them, the more that he's earning their trust. And I think it's also legitimizing the fact that he should be earning their trust. He deserves it for his behavior with them. And so I think that's something that plays really well with all of us too. So yeah, I think it's one of those episodes where it's it has a lot of great themes in it that are, I think, very resonant for any time that you're watching this. And it's not so preachy as to kind of get in the way of you just enjoying the episode. But I think it continues to remind us, and every time I've seen this episode, I'm continue to be reminded that the best way forward is through having a conversation and putting aside our preconceived notions about one another and or at the worst prejudices of one another, and getting to know each other one-on-one. And these characters do that, and they find each other to be trustworthy.
while we're talking about Archer as well, almost all the encounters that his crew has in deep space are first contacts at this point, for the humans anyway. And so someone whose trust he is not earning is the Mazarites. He has not earned their trust after deceiving them to save V'Lar. What did you think about his solution?
I think what he does here is he uses the advantage of them not knowing humans yet to the fullest extent. And I think he plays them well. What's interesting is we learn from V'Lar is that we're dealing with a corrupt group of individuals here. And so he has made an enemy of these Mazarites, but the rest of the Mazarites that will be helped by V'Lar's continued existence in the universe and then testimony, I think is phenomenal. She's planning on coming back to testify at his trial and the trial about this corruption. And so therefore, Archer has helped the Vulcans right a wrong that's been happening on this planet, which I think in the end will make him popular with the Mazarites who end up in power later. So, and I don't think it's something that we ever go back to at all,
well, yeah,
which would have been interesting to kind of see the fallout.
That's what I was going to ask you next, is that, yeah, it does end with V'Lar confronting them and saying that she's going to mention all of this in her testimony. And I think she would have been a good recurring character. Would you have liked to have seen a follow-up to this story, kind of like we did the Andorian incident? We had Shadows of Pajam, kind of a follow-up of sorts. And we have a few other instances of that in Enterprise before we get to the fourth season where we have the arcs. Would you have liked to have seen her come back and maybe have this Mazarite situation come up again, maybe see that trial, see the testimony, see Archer's interaction with Mazarites?
Oh, absolutely. I would have loved to have seen her again, you know, especially because I think she created a very interesting relationship with Archer. She seems like somebody who it would have been interesting for him to be able to explore a further relationship with, just for them to get to know each other's cultures better. You know, I think I can imagine them being interesting drinking buddies, which, you know,
Actually,
just because
I can see that.
she, you know, so I think there was a lot of potential to bring this character back in a really fun and enjoyable episode that was probably more lighthearted and was just more about, you know, cultural understanding type of thing. So, in fact, you know, I think she would have been really interesting, actually, to possibly have him be somebody to run into in the episode like Home.
Oh,
you know?
yeah.
That would have been kind of a fascinating thing. So, yeah, I think she was a really good character, really interesting character that if Enterprise had gotten more seasons, I think would have been phenomenal to be able to have her turn, especially in light of everything that happens with the Vulcan arc. I think she would have been a really interesting leader, possibly to kind of ascend in the new Vulcan because of her good understanding of not only Vulcans, but maybe other beings as well.
Yeah, it's kind of surprising that they didn't bring her back during that Vulcan arc in season 4. I wonder if it's a bit of the rift between the Manikoto era and the Berman Braga era of Enterprise in terms of the storytelling, or if maybe just too much time had passed, or this episode just kind of slipped off the radar because it's a one-off. I don't know. It would have made sense. And here's an idea.
Yeah.
How about evil V'Lar shows up in a Mirror Darkly?
That seems like a waste, but no, I
She's wearing like black leather. She's got like heavy makeup on, spiky, you know, eyelashes or something like that. Kind of like a, yeah.
Oh man. I do think that they're probably that when it comes to everything they're trying to do in season 4, it is definitely, it's all about what they're trying to get done story-wise, and it's a lot less about those kind of connections. So I don't think it's on purpose. I just think it's one of those things which, if they didn't feel so pressured, it would have been different. So
yeah.
I think the biggest thing, or there are a couple of big things that happened in this episode, which I thought were fun. One is we do hear the phrase "live long and prosper,"
right?
Which is really cool. And then we actually go warp 5 for the first time.
Yeah, right. And we see the Vulcan salute as well. Those are all firsts. And did we hear anyone so far in season 1 explain that Vulcans only mate once every 7 years?
I think that this might be the first time that T'Pol has mentioned that to anyone, maybe other than, I think this is the first time we hear that. So
I think it is, although I'd have to go back and check just to be sure, but I think that's the first mention, which would make it the first mention on the timeline.
Yeah. So which is kind of fun.
It is interesting that this is the first time that we've actually hit warp 5, when the whole premise of the show is the warp 5 ship, but we haven't been there actual warp 5 until now. All right. Well, any final thoughts on this episode? And what's your rating for this one?
I really like this episode. And in all honesty, I think that's the thing that I came away with. I thought that this was a great episode with characters. I thought this was a great episode to be able to explore more of the Vulcan-human relationship. And so I would give this 4 out of 5 Vulcan Ambassador handbags. This is a really, it's a strong episode. So I liked this one a lot more than I remembered. And that's the fun of rewatching this is getting that experience.
Yeah, I like this episode for the cultural building of the Vulcans to help flesh out who the Vulcans are. Seeing an ambassador who acts like I would expect an ambassador to act was nice, and it does so much for the character development of T'Pol and Archer. And overall, it's an interesting episode to watch. It's, like you said earlier, like it has really good messages in it, but it isn't preachy. So you can just watch it for what it is in universe. And that's nice. And I also like that V'Lar drinks iced tea. As a Southerner, I like that she tried iced tea. I just hope it was the really sweet kind. And it's too bad they didn't give her a pulled pork sandwich as well, although I guess as a Vulcan, she wouldn't eat meat.
Yeah.
So I'm going to give this episode 4 really loud Hawaiian shirts.
I love it.
All right, everyone. Well, we would love to hear your thoughts on Fallen Hero and any of the points we talked about today. There are many ways for you to do that. You can join our listeners group on Facebook. That's probably the best way to interact with fellow listeners and us as well. If you're already a member, you know what to do, but if you're not, just type Babel, B-A-B-E-L, into the search field, and it should come right on up. If not, type the whole name. It is a closed group, so if you're joining, please answer the questions and agree to the rules of the forum so that I can let you in. We'll put a post for this episode there, and you can add your comments to the thread. You can also find us on Twitter. Our username is TrekFM. That is our username everywhere in social media. And if you want to send Matthew and me email, you can do that by going to our website, trek.fm/contact. Use the form you find there. Choose to send to a show. Choose Warp 5, and that'll come to us by email. And also, if the app that you use to listen to podcasts lets you leave ratings and reviews, we would love to get that from you as well. That helps support the show and also can help other people find Warp 5. Now, Matthew, when you're not fleshing out your itinerary for that visit to Risa that's coming up in a couple of episodes, where can people find you?
Well, when that's not happening, you can find me on social media under the name @Rushing02. So Twitter, Instagram, Letterboxd, Vero, all those type of places. Here on the network, of course, on the 602 Club with our whole other side that doesn't talk Star Trek, but we talk about all those fandoms we love. And of course, got some bonus shows in there as well. So it's a great feed to check out. Also doing Literary Treks in the Orb. Literary Treks is about the books and the comics of Star Trek. And then Chris, you and I talk Deep Space Nine on the Orb, which is always a blast. And then on the Nerd Party Network, 2 shows. One is a completed show I did with Drea Kaufman. We talked on a show called Owl Post. It's all about Harry Potter, 1 chapter at a time. And then doing aggressive negotiations with the great John Mills as we talk Star Wars each and every week. But Chris, when you're not trying to pick out just the right Hawaiian shirt, where can people find you?
Well, yeah, when I finish doing that, you can find me in social media. That's the best place. Twitter is where I'm most active. My username is C. Bryan Jones, letter C, and Bryan with a Y. That's my username everywhere in social media. And I'd love to talk to you about Star Trek or Japan or whatever you'd like to chat about. And then here on the network, you already mentioned we do the Orb together where we talk Deep Space Nine. I pop in from time to time on Literary Treks, and Larry Nemechek and I do the Ready Room. We have a show called Interphase, and I'm working on some other things behind the scenes. So always staying busy with the network, whether I'm behind the mic or behind the keyboard. But I'd love to hear your thoughts. So hit me up there. See Bryan Jones on Twitter and everywhere in social media. And if you'd like to help us keep this podcast and everything that we're doing on the network going, we could really use your support through Patreon. To find out how to get involved in the network and support what we're doing, please visit patreon.com/trekfm. That's patreon.com/trekfm. And we really could not keep this going without your help. So I want to send a huge thank you to everyone who is supporting us right now. Well, Matthew, it's gonna get hot next week because we're heading to a desert crossing.
Well, Chris, I guess I better bring my sunscreen, so let's go.